In a quiet park, what began as an ordinary evening turned into a confrontation no one expected. Stay with us until the very end. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the city park, painting the benches and winding paths in hues of gold and amber. For most people, the park was a place of calm, where children played, couples strolled, and older men read newspapers while feeding pigeons. For Evelyn Harris, it was a sanctuary at the end of a long day. She had just finished her shift and, as always, chose to stop by the park to catch her breath before heading home. Her job wasn't glamorous. She worked hard day after day, wearing her black uniform, smiling politely at strangers, and carrying the weight of exhaustion in her shoulders. Yet, in the park, she allowed herself to feel light. Here, beneath the trees, she could sit on her favorite bench, close her eyes and imagine a world less harsh, a world where dignity wasn't questioned and peace wasn't stolen. On this particular day, however, the air felt different. The laughter of children rang out from one corner, but Evelyn sensed a heaviness pressing down on her chest. She brushed it off at first, telling herself it was just fatigue. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder and walked toward the bench near the fountain, the one she always chose because it faced the flowers. She was waiting for her husband. General James Harris had promised to meet her there after his duty, still in uniform. He was a man of discipline, power, and respect, but to Evelyn, he was simply her safe place. She longed to see him, to feel the calm his presence always brought. But before he arrived, trouble found her. From the edge of her vision, she noticed a figure approaching, a police officer, tall, muscular, with close-cropped hair, wearing the sharp blue shirt of his department. At first, she thought nothing of it. Officers often patrolled the area. But there was something unsettling about the way he moved. Too direct, too purposeful. His eyes locked on her as though she were prey. He stopped directly in front of her path, blocking her from moving forward. His hand rested on his belt near his holster, his chest puffed up with a kind of manufactured authority. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. Evelyn froze for a moment, startled. I'm just waiting for someone," she replied softly, trying to remain calm. The officer narrowed his eyes. "Waiting? For who? People like you shouldn't be loitering around here. This is a family park." Her chest tightened. She knew what he meant by people like you. The venom wasn't in the words themselves, but in the way he spat them out, filled with contempt. She swallowed, keeping her composure. "I'm not causing any trouble." "My husband will be here soon." He laughed bitterly, stepping closer, his shadow falling over her. "Your husband? What, some guy who lets you wander around while he's too busy to keep you in line? Don't lie to me." Evelyn tried to step aside, but he shifted, blocking her again. His voice rose, sharp and commanding. "Answer me properly when I talk to you." A couple, walking by, glanced over but quickly turned away, pretending not to see. A man, sitting with his dog, lowered his head. Everyone noticed, but no one dared to intervene. The uniform on the officer's chest gave him power, and fear kept the bystanders silent. "I told you," Evelyn said, her voice trembling now. "I'm waiting for my husband. He'll be here any minute." The officer's lip curled in a sneer. "Don't get smart with me." Suddenly, he shoved her shoulder. The force wasn't enough to knock her down, but it sent a jolt of shock through her body. Evelyn stumbled back, clutching her bag, her heart hammering. "You think you can talk back? You think you can stand here like you belong?" His tone grew harsher, uglier. He leaned down, his face inches from hers, and spat the words with hatred. "People like you never belong." Evelyn's breath caught. She could feel her eyes burning with tears, but she forced herself not to cry. Crying would only give him satisfaction. She tried to remain firm, but the humiliation sank deep into her chest like a blade. The officer clenched his fist and raised it, stopping just before her face. The knuckles hovered close to her cheek, the threat of violence so near she could feel the rush of air from his movement. He didn't strike, not yet. Instead, he snarled and shouted loud enough for the entire area to hear. "You're nothing here. Nothing. You understand me?" Evelyn squeezed her eyes shut, her body stiff with fear. Around her, the world seemed to fade. She could hear her own heartbeat louder than anything else. The officer's voice echoed, his fury pressing down on her like a storm. The park that once felt safe now felt like a prison, each second dragging with unbearable weight. Time slowed. For a moment, it felt as if she were utterly alone. Just her, the rage of a man abusing his badge, and the silence of strangers who refused to act. She thought of her husband, of how badly she wished he were already here. She thought of his voice, his steady presence, his promise that no matter what, she would never face the world alone. But right now, she was facing it, and the man in front of her had no intention of letting her leave with dignity. The fist remained at her face, the officer's shouting grew louder, and Evelyn braced herself for what might come next. And that was the moment the shadow of the park turned darker, heavier, closing around her in a way she could not yet escape. The fist hovering at her cheek did not land, but the threat of it felt like heat against her skin. The officer's mouth twisted as if the restraint cost him something, and then he chose cruelty over silence. He began to shout. Not a single sentence, but a barrage, a flood of sharp commands and sneering questions that were never meant to be answered. Each word came louder than the last, a performance pitched not for justice, but for dominance. "Look at me when I speak to you," he barked, though she already was. "What are you really doing here? Who told you that you could stand on this path? Do you think you can just come into a decent park and take up space like it's yours?" The park absorbed his voice and threw it back at them. A woman pushing a stroller flinched and steered a wide arc around the scene. Two teenagers on the scooters slowed to watch and then, catching the officer's glare, scuttled away, whispering. An older man who had been feeding pigeons gathered his crumbs into the paper sack with trembling fingers and pretended to be fascinated by the birds. Anything to avoid meeting Evelyn's eyes. She tried to answer, quietly, hoping softness might cool him. "Sir, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm waiting for my husband. That's all. Waiting?" He crowed on the word as if it were a punchline. "For who, exactly? For some fantasy to show up and explain why you're loitering where families bring children? You don't get to turn this place into your corner. Not today." "I'm not turning it into anything," she said, wishing her voice would stop shaking. "My husband will be here any minute." "Your husband?" He stretched the phrase until it curdled. "Sure, and I'm the mayor. Let me guess, he's important, right? That what you're implying? Is that your little trick? Drop a name and hope rules don't apply?" Evelyn swallowed. She had promised herself not to cry, not to give him the sight of tears, but her throat burned. She clutched her bag strap with white-knuckled fingers and forced herself to stand still. The sun had dipped lower. The shadows felt colder. She pictured the bench by the fountain, the flowers, the gentle hush of the water, and tried to hold on to it like a lifeline. He stepped closer again, close enough that she could smell the stale coffee on his breath. His voice changed shape from a shout to a hiss meant for her alone. "Say it again. Say he's coming. Then look me in the eye and admit you're lying." "I'm not lying," she said. "He told me to meet him here." "Please, I'm just waiting." He threw his head back and laughed, loud and theatrical, inviting the few nearby witnesses to share the joke. A jogger slowed. A couple on a nearby bench went rigid. No one moved closer. No one asked if she needed help. The uniform made everyone's eyes slide away, and the officer felt it. She could see the rush of it in the way his jaw relaxed, as if the world itself were rewarding him. "You people always have a story," he said, the words sharpened to wound. "Always a reason, always a claim that you deserve respect you haven't earned." She flinched. He didn't use a slur. He didn't need to. The contempt in his tone did the same work. Publicly, deliberately, he made her small, and then pretended she had made herself that way. His hand lifted, 2 fingers pointing at the blank nameplate on her chest, tapping it once with a little snap. The sound was tiny but humiliating, as if he had rung a bell to announce what she was to him, not in a person, a category. "Where's your ID?" he demanded. "Where's proof you're even supposed to be in this neighborhood?" "This is a public park," she said. "I work nearby. I come through here every day after my shift." He leaned sideways to peer at the modest black uniform she wore, the scuffed shoes that told the truth of long hours. It should have moved him to basic decency. It only widened his grin. "Of course you do," he said. "Of course you do. And I'm sure you know all the rules, don't you? Except the one where you don't stand around looking suspicious." "I'm not suspicious." The words came out, small and inadequate against his booming voice. "I'm just tired. I'm waiting, that's all. Please, step back." "Don't tell me what to do," he snapped, volume rising again. "You don't direct me." "You don't direct anything here. I direct. I decide who belongs and who doesn't." A cyclist clanked to a halt near the drinking fountain, set a foot on the ground, and watched. He took out his phone, lifted it part way, then lowered it when the officer shot him a hard glance. A father with a small boy turned the child's head so he wouldn't stare. Up in the trees, a few birds scolded, as if even they resented the noise. Evelyn reached for her phone slowly, not to record, just to text her husband that she felt unsafe. The officer's eyes snapped to the movement like a trap. His hand shot out and slapped the phone from her grip, not hard enough to send it flying, but with the deliberate insult of a teacher knocking a contraband toy off a desk. It hit the top of the bench and clattered onto the concrete. "Don't play games with me," he said. "Don't try to call anyone to come save you. You'll talk to me until I say you're done." She bent to retrieve the phone with careful fingers. They shook so badly she nearly dropped it again. A tear slipped free despite her will and traced a line over her cheek. She wiped it fast, angry at the weakness, and straightened to face him. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not a problem. I've hurt no one. I just wanna wait." He took another half-step forward until the brim of his hat threw her face into shadow. "You think you can stand there and lecture me on who's a problem?" he said. "You think your tone is going to earn you courtesy? The only reason you're still here is because I haven't decided to end this conversation." His words were heavier now, not simply loud, but thick with pleasure. He was enjoying himself. She could feel it like humidity rising. He enjoyed the way the crowd had made a ring of absence around them. He enjoyed the way her shoulders trembled despite her attempt to hold them still. He enjoyed the power to fill the air with his voice and make everyone else swallow theirs. "I'll ask again," he said. "Who told you you could be here?" "No one has to," she answered, trying to sound firm. "It's public. It's for everyone." He scoffed, then turned his head so his next sentence would carry. "Hear that?" he said to the people who pretended not to listen. "She thinks rules don't matter. She thinks she can park herself wherever and cry if anyone asks questions." The lie hung there, slick and ready to be believed by anyone who needed an excuse to keep walking. Evelyn felt heat surge through her. Shame, fury, a desperate wish to vanish. She remembered mornings when she and her husband had walked these same paths sipping coffee, invisible to the notice that now crushed her. She remembered the quiet comfort of telling him about her day as the fountain whispered. Those memories felt like a story from a different city. The officer tilted his head, studied her as if inspecting a stain. "Answer me properly," he said. "Full name, address, employer, and if you stumble, I'll take that as proof you're lying." She took a breath and gave her name, steady as she could. Gave the cross street where she lived. He listened with a smile that said he didn't believe a word, and that not believing was the point. When she finished, he clicked his tongue. "Convenient," he said. "Everything about you is convenient until it isn't." "I can show you my work badge," she offered, desperate now to make the moment end. "It's in my bag." "Keep your hands where I can see them," he snapped, then added, quieter, "Don't give me a reason to make this worse for you." Worse. The word struck like a cold breeze. She forced her hands still at her sides, palms slightly open, as if she were a demonstration mannequin in a training video. The pose itself felt like a humiliation, a surrender in front of strangers who watched and catalogued her fear. From somewhere behind her, a child asked, "Why is that man yelling?" And a parent answered, "Come on, let's go," with a tremor that betrayed unease. A man in a suit took out his phone and pretended to check email, angling his body away. A woman on a nearby bench rolled her lips inward, pressing them so tight the color left them, and then she too stared at the ground. "Sir," Evelyn tried again, gentler, because she had nothing left but gentleness. "My husband will be here soon." "If you'll just let me wait," he barked a laugh and leaned in, his voice sliding into a mockery of tenderness that felt filthier than his shouting. "Soon," he echoed. "Soon." That the fairy tale? He's going to appear and tell me to back off? That how it works where you come from make-believe saves the day? Her vision blurred. She blinked it clear. She would not give him the satisfaction of sobbing, not now, but the weight of the moment pulled at her ribs, at her spine, at the delicate places where anxiety gnaws. She thought of calling out to the bystanders, of asking for help in a voice strong enough to shame them into motion. But when she inhaled to try, the officer's fist lifted again, not striking, merely poised, and the breath collapsed into silence. He dropped his fist slowly, savoring the way her shoulders had tightened. "See," he said, "you understand when you want to. You understand that I am the voice here." He moved to her left, then to her right, pacing a small dominant circle that kept her in the center. Every step was a reminder. He could force her to pivot if she wanted to keep him in sight, and he wanted her to pivot. He wanted the choreography of control recorded in her muscles. "Eyes up," he commanded. "Keep them on me. You don't get to stare at the ground and hide." She obeyed. It felt like a theft, a small dignity taken from her and folded into his pocket with all the others. In the distance, the fountain continued to murmur. Somewhere, a radio played a cheerful song. The ordinary world, indifferent and sunlit, continued while hers shrank to a ring of trampled grass and the man who delighted in shrinking it. "Tell me you're sorry," he said abruptly. "Say it loud enough for everyone to hear." "For what?" she asked, before she could stop herself. "For wasting my time," he snarled. "For thinking you could stand here and act like you belong." For making me raise my voice, her mind flashed white. The demand was so naked, so obscene in its logic, that for a second she felt suspended in disbelief. Then she found her voice, thin but present. I won't apologize for existing in a public park." His face hardened. Wrong answer. He stepped close enough that his shoulder brushed hers, a calculated bump that turned the world sideways for an instant. The taste of copper rose at the back of her mouth. She steadied herself, the strap of her bag digging into her palm like a rope. He looked past her at the people who had arranged themselves into shadows and bent backs. "Everyone sees you refusing to cooperate," he announced. "Remember that when you start pretending to be a victim." The words landed like stones. Evelyn scanned the faces, someone, anyone, until she found the cyclist again. He had inched closer, phone half raised like a secret. His eyes met hers, then flicked to the officer, and fear won. The phone lowered. The moment folded in on itself. A tremor began in Evelyn's knees, a small earthquake she could not hide. It traveled up her legs, into her chest, until it felt like the organ of her courage was rattling against the cage of her ribs. She did not want to sob. She had wanted to leave this place the way she always did, slowly, peacefully, the last heat of the day fading from her skin. Instead, she stood where he had pinned her, like a pinned insect the sky had overlooked. He tapped her blank nameplate again, softer this time, almost intimate in its malice. "I'll tell you how this ends," he murmured. "You do what I say. You apologize, you leave, and next time you think twice about showing up where you make people uncomfortable." She stared at him. The tears she had fought broke loose one by one, betraying her, sketching new paths over old ones on her cheeks. But under the salt of fear there was a thread of anger, quiet, stubborn, alive. She kept her voice from crumbling and said, "I won't admit to something I didn't do." His mouth flattened. The performance needed a finale, and she had denied him the line he wanted. He lifted his hand again, as if repeating the gesture would fill the gap. The fist hovered, a wordless threat, and stayed there, flaunted, framed by the last light of the afternoon. Around them, the park seemed to hold its breath. Evelyn felt the moment break inside her, a thin membrane between endurance and a plea. She understood, with a clarity that hurt, that waiting in silence asked too much of her. She could not trade her voice for the hope that witnesses might become rescuers. She needed the air to hear her. She needed the truth to be spoken, even if no one answered. She drew in a breath that scraped her throat raw and let it out as sound, full and undeniable, cutting through his noise and through the park's hush in a way that could not be ignored. "Help!" she cried. "Please, someone, help me!" The cry for help lingered in the air like a crack of thunder, breaking through the haze of fear that had settled over the park. For the first time, the officer faltered. His hand, still raised in a fist, hung uncertainly in front of Evelyn's face. He glanced over his shoulder, aware that the sound had drawn more attention than he had intended. A few bystanders had already frozen mid-step, their eyes wide, their phones half raised. Evelyn's heart pounded so hard it shook her entire frame. The word had cost her more courage than she knew she had left. She trembled, bracing herself for retaliation, certain he would strike to silence her. The officer's jaw clenched. His lips curled into something between a sneer and a snarl, and for a moment she believed the blow was inevitable. But before he could act, a voice cut through the tense silence, calm, deep, firm, a voice that carried a weight no shouting could match. "Step away from her!" The officer spun around, startled. Evelyn's breath caught as she turned her head and saw him, James Harris, her husband, still in his immaculate uniform. The sun caught the silver of his rank insignia, the ribbons on his chest, the gleam of his boots polished to perfection. He stood tall, shoulders squared, presence commanding. His gaze was sharp and cold, like a blade drawn in silence. General James Harris was not a man who needed to raise his voice to be heard. His authority spoke for itself, and in that moment it was absolute. Evelyn felt her knees weaken, a flood of relief nearly collapse in her where she stood. He was here, her safe place, her protector, her husband. The officer blinked, taken aback by the sight of the man before him. For an instant, confusion clouded his face, but arrogance quickly returned to fill the void. He squared his shoulders, trying to recover the authority he had just lost. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. His tone was blustery, defensive, but there was a tremor beneath it, a small crack in the armor of his confidence. James took one deliberate step forward. "I am her husband. And I am giving you one chance to do what's right. Stand down, remove your hands, and walk away before you regret the next decision you make." The officer scoffed, though his voice had lost some of its venom. "Her husband, huh? You think that matters to me? You think wearing some shiny suit means I answer to you? This is my jurisdiction, my badge, my rules." The words rang hollow even as he said them. James's presence shifted the ground beneath the conversation. His calm wasn't weakness, it was a storm waiting to be unleashed. He didn't flinch, didn't even blink. He simply leveled his gaze at the officer, voice even, but laced with an iron edge. "You have disgraced your uniform. You've humiliated an innocent woman. You've abused the authority entrusted to you, and worst of all, you've done it in public, where the eyes of this community now see you for what you are." The officer bristled, his face reddened. "Watch your mouth. You don't know who you're talking to." "I know exactly who I'm talking to," James said, stepping close enough that their faces were only inches apart. "A man who thinks his badge is a shield for cruelty. A man who preys on the vulnerable because he has nothing else to offer. And a man who has already lost." For a moment, the park was still. The tension pulled tighter like a bowstring drawn to its limit. Evelyn, standing just behind her husband, could feel the shift. The power had changed hands. The officer's bluster no longer rang true, and the crowd that had once averted their eyes now leaned forward, sensing the tide turning. The officer tried to recover, clinging desperately to his authority. "You think you can tell me what to do? You don't run this department. I don't care if you're some military man. You have no power here." James finally allowed himself the smallest of smiles, not warm, but cold and knowing. He reached into his pocket, drew out his phone, and held it up between them. "I outrank you in every way that matters," he said quietly, "and in less than 5 minutes, you'll learn exactly how powerless you are." The officer swallowed hard, his bravado cracking. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The general's presence loomed over him like a mountain, unyielding, immovable, unshakable. Evelyn clutched her bag to her chest, her breathing ragged but steadying. She had never seen her husband like this, not on parade grounds, not at family gatherings, not even in private moments of anger. This was something else. This was the man the world respected, the man soldiers obeyed without question, the man who embodied discipline and justice. The officer shifted his weight, his eyes darting nervously toward the gathering crowd. People were no longer pretending not to watch. Phones were raised high now, recording everything. The safety of anonymity was gone. His every move would be scrutinized. His every word could be replayed. James stepped closer, his voice low, firm, final. "Put your hands behind your back. Because the next words I speak won't be for you. They'll be for the people who have the authority to strip you of your badge and your freedom. And believe me, they'll listen." The officer's face twisted, caught between defiance and fear. His fists clenched at his sides, but his eyes betrayed him. The swagger was gone. The arrogance was fading. All that remained was a man trapped, exposed, and cornered. Evelyn stood silently behind James, tears streaming down her cheeks, not of fear now, but of relief. She felt her body trembling, but her heart steadied with every word her husband spoke. She had called for help, and he had come. The park seemed to exhale. The moment stretched thin, balanced on the edge of something inevitable. The officer's fate was no longer in his own hands, and with one final, deliberate motion, James raised the phone to his ear and made the call that would change everything. The phone call was short, clipped, and heavy with authority. James Harris didn't need to explain who he was. The weight of his name and his position carried more than enough force. Within minutes, the sound of engines approached from the far side of the park. 2 black SUVs and a marked patrol car rolled up onto the paved path, scattering joggers and cyclists as they came to a halt. Doors opened in unison. Officers in plainclothes stepped out, their jackets marked with the insignia of Internal Affairs. Behind them, 2 uniformed deputies moved quickly, their expressions tight, already aware of what they'd been called into. The crowd, which had grown since Evelyn's desperate cry, parted to let them through. Phones hovered in the air like a field of eyes, capturing every second. The abusive officer shifted his stance, sweat shining at his temples. His bravado cracked under the weight of approaching footsteps. He opened his mouth to speak, to protest, but James cut him off with a glance so sharp it silenced him instantly. "This officer assaulted my wife," James said, his voice steady but loud enough for all to hear. "He harassed her, humiliated her, and threatened violence in public. You will take him into custody now." The Internal Affairs captain nodded once, grim. "Yes, sir." The abusive officer's face turned crimson. He tried to bark back, his voice rising with desperation. "This is insane. I was just doing my job. She was acting suspicious." "Suspicious?" James's voice cut like steel. "A woman waiting for her husband in a public park? Suspicious because of what? Her skin color? Don't waste another breath. Everyone here saw what you did, and the world will see it too." The officer's eyes darted wildly across the crowd. Dozens of cameras were pointed at him. His authority, once a shield, now felt like paper armor dissolving in the rain. He took a step back, hands raised slightly, as though he could push the moment away. "You don't understand," he stammered, his tone shifting from defiance to pleading. "I've got a family. Kids, I can't lose this job. Please, don't do this." James didn't flinch. His face remained cold, his stance unwavering. "You thought of none of that when you laid hands on her? You thought of none of that when you used your badge to terrorize instead of protect. Actions have consequences. Today, you face yours." The Internal Affairs officers moved forward. The abusive cop tried to backpedal, his words tumbling over themselves. "Wait, listen, I didn't mean. She misunderstood. This isn't what it looks like." But the deputies seized his arms, pulling them behind his back. The sharp click of handcuffs echoed across the park, louder than his protests. The sound drew murmurs from the crowd, followed by a wave of applause. For the first time that day, Evelyn felt the crowd on her side. The officer struggled, his face twisted with panic. "You can't do this to me. I've served 10 years. You're ruining my life." James stepped closer, his eyes dark. "You ruined your life the moment you thought cruelty was your right. You wear a badge, but today you showed the world you're unworthy of it." The officer sagged in the deputy's grip, his protests growing weaker, less convincing. His gaze darted toward Evelyn, as though begging for sympathy, but her eyes met his with quiet steel. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than his pleas. The crowd, emboldened now that the danger had passed, erupted in cheers. Some clapped, others shouted words of encouragement toward James and Evelyn. A woman raised her phone high, recording every detail. A man called out, "About time someone stood up to them." Evelyn trembled as James stepped to her side. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder, grounding her. She leaned into his touch, the safety she had longed for finally wrapping around her like a shield. "You're safe now," James whispered, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "It's over." But Evelyn knew it wasn't truly over. Not yet. The bruises left on her dignity, the sting of humiliation, would not fade so easily. And the image of his fist hanging in the air would haunt her for days to come. Yet, watching him dragged away in handcuffs gave her a measure of justice she hadn't thought possible. As the internal affairs captain approached James, his tone carried both respect and gravity. "General Harris, thank you for calling this in. We'll handle it from here. This man will be stripped of his badge immediately. The charges will stick: assault, misconduct, racial abuse. He won't wear a uniform again." James nodded once, his jaw firm. "See that he doesn't. If you let this man slip through the cracks, you send a message that this kind of behavior is acceptable. And it is not." The captain met his eyes, swallowed hard, and gave another nod. "Understood, sir." The officer was pushed into the back of the patrol car, his protests muffled by the slam of the door. The vehicles pulled away, engines fading into the distance. The park began to breathe again. The crowd, still buzzing with excitement, slowly dispersed, though many lingered, still whispering about what they had witnessed. As quiet returned, Evelyn exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. Her body trembled, the adrenaline refusing to leave her veins. James turned her gently to face him. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice softer now, threaded with worry. She shook her head. "No, just shaken." He brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb, his own expression tightening with anger. "I should have been here sooner. I'll never forgive myself for what he put you through." Evelyn caught his hand in hers, squeezing it tightly. "You came. That's what matters. You came." The weight of his uniform, the power of his presence had saved her, but in her heart, it wasn't his rank that mattered. It was him, the man who had chosen to stand between her and the cruelty of the world. Around them, the fountain continued to whisper. The flowers still swayed in the evening breeze. The park had returned to normal, but Evelyn knew nothing would ever feel quite the same. Still, for the first time that day, she felt peace begin to bloom again. And as she leaned against James's shoulder, listening to the fading echoes of applause, she knew that justice, at least for this moment, had been done. That evening, as the city lights blinked on one by one, the story of what had unfolded in the park began to spread far beyond its borders. Videos recorded by onlookers circulated within hours. Headlines lit up phones and laptops. General confronts officer in public park. Police harassment ends in arrest. Justice served before a crowd. Inside their quiet home, Evelyn sat on the edge of the sofa, still shaken but slowly finding calm. Her hands curled around a cup of tea she hadn't yet sipped. The warmth of it grounded her, though her body still carried the memory of fear, the pounding heart, the raised fist, the sting of being treated as less than human. She replayed the officer's sneer in her mind, and the echo of his voice haunted her chest like a bruise. James sat across from her, still in uniform, his posture as rigid as it had been hours earlier in the park. He hadn't taken off his jacket, hadn't allowed himself the comfort of relaxation. His eyes, usually soft with love when he looked at her, were hardened, locked in the role he had carried his entire life: protector, leader, man of justice. On the television, reporters spoke over looping clips, the officer shouting in Evelyn's face, James stepping forward like a wall of iron, the moment of handcuffs snapping shut. Each clip carried weight, each headline louder than the last. The nation had seen what Evelyn had endured, and more importantly, what James had done to stop it. She finally set the untouched tea aside and looked at him. "They're talking about you everywhere," she said quietly. James shook his head. "They should be talking about you. About what you went through. No one should ever have to feel that powerless." Her throat tightened. "I wasn't powerless. Not when you came." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped. "I heard you call. I'll never forget the sound of your voice. It broke me to know you needed me and I wasn't already there. Evelyn, if I could trade places, if I could take every second of what you endured and carry it myself, I would." She rose, walked over, and placed her hands gently on his. "You already did. When you stood in front of me, when you faced him, when you made sure he couldn't hurt me anymore, you carried it all." His eyes softened finally, the sternness giving way to something more human. He reached up, brushed his fingers over hers, and pulled her close. "Then let me carry it forever." The next morning, justice arrived swiftly. The officer's badge and gun were stripped in a formal ceremony inside the precinct. Cameras recorded him walking out, not as an enforcer of law, but as a man disgraced, his face hidden behind bowed shoulders. Charges were filed: assault, misconduct, abuse of authority, hate crimes. His name, once faceless among thousands of uniforms, was now etched in shame across headlines. Evelyn watched the coverage with quiet dignity. It didn't erase the fear. It didn't erase the tears she had shed, but it restored something she thought that she had lost in that park: her voice, her place, her worth. She knew the road forward would still carry scars, but those scars were now proof of her strength. For James, the aftermath became larger than one man. His actions sparked conversations across the city, then the country. People spoke about accountability, about power abused and power used to protect. His name became a symbol, not just of rank or command, but of courage in defense of what was right. Days later, they returned to the park together. The fountain still whispered, the flowers still swayed, and children still ran freely along the paths. But this time, when Evelyn sat on the bench, she did not feel fear. She felt the warmth of James's hand in hers, steady and unwavering. She turned to him, her eyes glistening in the sunlight. "Today, you saved me. But more than that, you saved my dignity. You reminded me that no matter how dark it gets, the truth can still win." James squeezed her hand, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "And I promise you, Evelyn, no one will ever take that from you again. Not while I draw breath around them." The park was alive with the simple sounds of life: laughter, footsteps, voices blending into the hum of peace. The same peace Evelyn thought she had lost forever was now restored, stronger because it had been defended. As they rose from the bench and walked side by side, the sun dipping low behind them, she knew this moment would remain etched in her heart. Not just as the day she had been saved, but as the day justice had been carried out before the world. Justice was not abstract. It had a face. It had a name. And to her, it was the man walking beside her, the man who loved her enough to stand against cruelty and ensure she would never be alone in the fight again. Justice was served, but the message is clear. Silence is never the answer. If you believe in standing against injustice, Hit that like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.